Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio. Welcome to, you see I'm smiling because I've been working with my scraps. It is another scrap quilt start. I had to say that slowly, didn't I? Yeah, I've been working with my scraps. Now you probably by this point will have seen I did my Hearts and 9 patch quilt tutorial recently. And as I'd made some 9 patch blocks in sort of red and cream, I thought I might as well just keep going with this and turn these into a scrap quilt. So that's what I've been doing. So I've got my pile of 9 patches here, and I think I'm almost done with those. I've been using them as leaders and enders and sewing them in between other bits. And I also took them to my sewing group this week, and I was a bit tired, so I couldn't concentrate on anything difficult. So I was just making those. So they're almost done. So I've got my little basket again, and I'm going to put it under the close-up so you can have a little look in there, because that's a little sneak peek of what's to come. So I've got my little piles again, and you'll also notice in here there's some fabrics from some scraps that I've been unpicking and reusing, which were sort of different sizes. They weren't cut at the right size. So I'm also going to be doing something that utilises those. So I've got a cunning plan for this scrap quilt. So should we have a look? Now I'm not going to cover the 9 patch block because, as I said, we did that in the Hearts and 9 patch. So we're going to concentrate on what else we could be putting with the Hearts and 9 patch blocks. And I've come up with a couple of little ideas, and then I'll show you what I've settled on. So first of all, I'm just going to sort of take you back a little bit in time and just show you. Now this was some of the scraps. This was a piece of scrap I had that I was working with. And my decision really when I'm working with scraps is, am I going to use the fabric? This was actually part of a larger half square triangle. And there was only a couple in the scrap. So I was thinking there's not enough there to do a lot with. And my decision is always, am I going to get more use of them as they are, or am I going to get better use of them if I unpick them and take them back to fabric and sort of reuse them again? And that's what I decided with this. I thought, yeah, I haven't got enough to do anything with large squares. I'm doing some 2.5 inch 9 patches. I'll take it back and I'll reuse it and cut it smaller. So let's start there in what I've been doing. So I'm just going to get my smaller ruler. Now my rule of thumb is if I'm working with sort of big bits of fabric, I tend to use the bigger rulers. So that might be your sort of 24.5 by 6.5. But when I'm working with my scraps, I tend to get my smaller rulers out. I just sort of find it's a bit more useful. It's a bit more sort of user friendly. So the folded corner clipper, I use that for half square triangles. That's a really good one for this. And then my 12.5 by 2.5 inch ruler, that, you know, I use that practically every day because I do a lot with strips and squares at 2.5. So I'm just going to cut a 2.5 inch strip from this little piece of fabric. And then from that, now I can either get probably about 3 2.5 inch half square triangles, but I'm going to cut it because I think it's going to be more useful to me as a 2.5 inch square and a 2.5 inch half square triangle. Now the beauty of having something like the folded corner clipper or any other half square triangle ruler, there are loads out there. Creative Grids do a couple at least a couple in a couple of different sizes. But also Easy Angle, I think, do a half square triangle ruler. So you might already have one in your stash. So look for something. I'm going to put this under the close-up. That sort of shape, it's got your 90-degree corner there, and it's a 45-degree angle at the tip. But that will be for cutting half square triangles. And that's perfect when you're working with scraps, because I don't always have a big enough piece to cut a 2 7/8 or a 3 inch square to do it 2 at a time. So a little half square triangle ruler is perfect when I'm working with scraps. So I'm going to get a half square triangle out of that. So that's the only little bit of waste that I'm going to have from that strip, which I'm happy with because it's scraps. Now this one, I could either do a 2.5, but actually I could, if I wanted, I could get a 3. It's not quite big enough to get a 3.5. But I could get a 3.25. I'm actually going to cut a 3 because I might use a 3 in something else. So, and I do have a little container of odd half square triangles. And then that can get sort of set aside. But if I needed more 2.5 inch half square triangles, I could cut that at 2.5. So from that big triangle, I've got those 3 pieces. Let me put them under the close-up. let's do that with it. Hopefully that's all in shot. So you can see I've got those 3 pieces. That's going to be far more useful to me than it was as the big half square triangle. So that's just a little bit about working with scraps. So for people that are either new or like to sort of do a bit more working with scraps. Now I'm going to put those in my little box here. I'm going to put the squares on the squares because I'm still doing my little organisation bit. I'll put that one in there, but we're not using that for now. So anybody that knows me knows how much I love a star block. So one of the options I was thinking about for this scrap quilt is to do a friendship star, because that is one of my favourite star blocks. Now I know Katrina recently did the lovely Pam and Nikki Lintott Circle of Friends quilt with friendship stars. And I know she showed you my cushion that I made with my little piece of sort of cross stitch in the centre with the friendship stars. I think I made that during lockdown, just one of those projects. So anyway, these were all cut from my scraps. I went off on a tangent there, didn't I? Sort of reminiscing about friendship stars. These were all cut from the scraps, like I've just shown you, with the little folded corner clipper that I'm using as my half square triangle ruler. So first thing, we need 4 half square triangles for our star block. So let's just grab these. I should have 4 here. And let's just take those to the machine and sew them. Actually, if I take all the squares, we can assemble it at the machine. So I'm going to start on my little starter piece because it's quite a narrow piece there with the half square triangle. And what can happen sometimes is the needle can just push that down into the throat plate. Now you can use a single hole throat plate to stop that happening, but I tend to sort of move my needle about a bit, so I don't tend to use the single hole throat plate very much. Right, I'm just checking I've got 1/4 inch seam. I have. Now the corner to watch, I always say when I'm doing half square triangles, the corner to watch is this one here where the right angle is. And I tend to get those lined up and not worry too much about what's happening here at the seam, because these are all hand cut. So there might be a slight difference there, but if that is square and they're both laying on top of each other, we should get a nice square square. And I'm just going to trim off these little dog ears here. And I've got one more to do because I've left that triangle under the needle. That's just so that it's already started on something, and I'm just going to press that seam just gently because that's a bias edge, so don't be too rough with it. Actually, I will take, just for clarity, I will just take them all to the mat. If I was at home, I would just assemble it all at the machine, but just so that everybody can see what I'm doing, let's just do it here. Now, I don't tend to take my blocks to the iron to press them, just because of that bias edge. You know, the more heat and the more we sort of move the fabric about, the more likely is we're going to stretch it. So I tend to wait until I've assembled the block before I press it. So for the friendship star, I'm going to start with a dark 2.5 inch square in the centre. Now I tend to always like to start with my sort of dark in this bottom sort of left corner, but you can do it so your star points that way. But if you're making a lot, just make sure you're consistent. I know in the friendship circle pattern or circle of friends pattern, you have to do stars with star legs pointing in different directions to make it lock. So my trick for knowing how it goes, put the next one on and then give it a quarter turn. And then that one on top, quarter turn. That one on top, quarter turn. And then all your star legs will be pointing the right way. And then we're just going to fill in the four corners with some more of our background. So we're just going to sew that together. Now, because it's a 9-patch star, it's going to fit with our 9-patch block. So that's a good top tip. Any other pieced block that's working in the same 3x3 grid using the same size will work with your 9-patch. So there's lots of flexibility. Once you've get the basics of a pattern, you can sort of adapt and just sort of make hundreds of other sort of quilts. And that's what I love about quilting. You can sort of do very similar blocks, but have a completely different looking quilt. So I'm just going to pin these. And then we'll take it all to the machine and put our friendship star together. So this is just one possibility. This is where I normally turn things around, isn't it, on the way to the machine. Right, let's stack those up in order. Stack those up in order and let's go and sew. And I'm going to start on my starter piece. Now I've put the hover function back on the machine. On this one, it's feature packed. I love this machine. There's just a little touch of a button on the screen here that does that for me. Sorry, I should say this machine is the Janome Memorycraft 9480 QC. I know sometimes we get a question about that, so. And then I'm going to press that seam under the solid squares. So that one goes on. And by doing that, we've pressed towards the square there and the square there, which means that our seams are going in opposite directions. So this should come together nicely. So let's look at how we did. There's our friendship star. Let me put it under the close-up. I'll let you look at all my match points. I know I'm amongst friends, so there it is. So let's give that a quick press. So there it is. So let's just lay it out. Let's just mock it up. Let's put it somewhere a bit more centrally. So that's what it would look like in with the 9-patch blocks. So that's a really nice one to do, another pieced block to go in between the 9 patches. And I did think, shall I do that? And then I thought, no, I don't think I will. As much as I like that, I'll set that aside and I'll use that somewhere else. What I'm actually going to do is a snowball block. 9-patch and snowball blocks. It's a marriage made in heaven in my mind. So that's what that's going to look like. So in between, Now I'm going to do 30, and you're going to say, Jeanette, you always do 30. It's quite a nice number. I'm going to start with 30, and then if I've got more fabric, I can add to it. But 30 generally gives you a fairly decent sized quilt, and it's sort of quite a nice number to do. I think for the scraps that I've got, that's probably going to be about my limit. I'm not sure that I'm going to have enough fabric to do another row onto that, but if I have, I might put another row underneath. So I'm going to do a 5x6 layout, but it might end up being 5x7 if I can get another 5 blocks out of the fabrics I've got. So I'm going to do a snowball block. So to do that, I've cut myself some 6.5-inch squares of background. Now, because I'm going to do 30 blocks, I need 15 9-patch blocks and 15 snowball blocks. Now, the snowball block is another really versatile one because you can either leave it plain like that and do some nice quilting in it, you could do some stitching or some embroidery in it, or you could do some applique in it. Lots of different options for that. So I've got my 6.5-inch squares cut here. And I was really fortunate, I actually found a bit of background fabric that I could just get the right number of cuts out of. So I'm just going to take one of those squares, let's just clip those back together. I'm going to snowball the corners. Now I'm actually going to show you 2 different ways of snowballing the corners. Now, if you've got the folded corner clipper, this is one of the, one of the things that this tool was actually designed for is taking off corners. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lay it under the close-up so you can see where I'm putting the ruler. So there's the corner of my square. And I'm going to be adding 2.5 inches. So I'm going to line up my 2.5, and it's this little tick here. Now, is that central? This little tick, what I call an uptick, these little lines that go up the side here, I need to be placing that on the edge of the fabric. My flat edge should be on the top there. I'm just going to pull that down so hopefully you've got that all in shot. So my flat edge of my folded corner clipper is there. My uptick at the 2.5-inch line is on the edge, and then I can cut off that little piece of fabric. And what we can do with that, so if we go into my little box and dig out the little 2.5-inch half square triangle that we cut from that scrap piece at the start, that will now fit perfectly onto that corner. So what that's done is taken off enough fabric, leaving ourselves the seam allowance to add a 2.5-inch half square triangle. So that is, as I said, one of the things that folded corner clipper is designed for. So I'm going to just pin that one there. But if you haven't got the folded corner clipper, we can just put it on. I'm just going to go for something that looks a bit plainer. I'm looking for a plain one, but not finding it. So let's go with that one, which is a little bit plainer. And I'm doing mine scrappy on the corners. And we're going to grab a pen. Yep, I'm just checking that was an iron-off one and not that it really matters. And I'm just going to draw diagonal line corner to corner on the back. So this is what we call the flip and stitch method. And we just want to make sure that that line is always sort of pointing inwards towards the centre of the block. So if we don't have the folded corner clipper, we can do the trick with the square. My line's going in that direction, and we're going to sew just slightly to the outside of that line, and then we'll trim that away. Now the beauty of the folded corner clipper is we've saved ourselves a little bit of fabric. We've still got the waste from here, but because we can add triangles, and because sometimes I've got odd little bits from my scraps that you might just get a triangle out of but not a square, I can utilise them with that folded corner clipper. So for me, working with my scraps is a really useful tool. So let's take those both to the machine and we'll do both of those. Now I know in one of Katrina's videos recently, she took the 1/4 inch foot off to do the flip and stitch, but I'm not going to. I'm going to be a rebel, and I'm just going to run my needle along that line. So there they are. So let me just put that onto the close-up so you can see where I've stitched. So you can see my drawn lines there, and I've just run just to the outside. And all that does is it just allows for the fold. When we fold that fabric back, it just gives us a little bit more space for that fold so that our fabric meets that corner nicely. So let's take it to the iron. So there we are. We've got our snowball corners two ways, once with the folded corner clipper, and then for those who haven't got that tool, just the normal way with the square, and I'm just going to trim off. So like I said, for me, working with scraps, that is a really useful tool. Now, this is never a precise way, and I'm going to show you this. If you have a little bit hanging off like that, that's absolutely fine. Because of how we do that with the squares, it's not a precise way of snowballing corners. This is a scrappy quilt, it's not going to matter. But what I'll need to make sure I do is before I come to use that block, I'm just going to make sure that it's still at my 6.5, and I'm just going to trim. And that's all that came off. So it's only a little bit, but you know, over a big quilt that would add up to quite a lot. So let's just have a look how our folded corner clipper corner did. And that's perfect. Apart from trimming off that little dog ear, let me put that under the close-up so you can see. So it's the other beauty of the folded corner clipper. You get a really accurate way of putting on the snowballed corners with that. But like I say, useful tool, but if you haven't got it, you can just use your 2.5-inch squares. So we would snowball all 4 corners on that, and then I need to make 15 of those, and then I would have enough for the quilt. So I was going to do that, and then I thought, hold on, Jeanette, you've got some scraps from a quilt, or from some quilt blocks that were in the scraps, that were all cut at different sizes, and the quilter was having problems putting that together. You've got those pieces. Now I've kept putting them in here in my basket, and I've kept them in a separate pile, and this is the stack. Now if you've seen that tutorial where we've sort of when things go wrong, this is why. This ended up being the whole stack of fabrics that were in those blocks that ended up being the wrong size, either because the quilter purposely trimmed to try to get to the block to the right measurement, or that they'd miscut some of their squares. So it was quite a pile of fabric. So I thought, surely I could utilise that in this. So I'm going to, in my normal Jeanette styly, I'm going to be making some hexagons for English paper piecing, and I'm going to be doing it from those scraps, so it gets rid of those as well. These are actually 2 slightly different sizes. This is a 3/4 inch, and that's measured by the side, the measurement on each side. So if I put a ruler along there, let me just show you something that makes sense to my brain. So there we are. So that's a 3/4 inch from there to there. And this one, which is slightly bigger, which is 7/8. So if I put the ruler on there, you can see it's sort of 1 notch up from the 3/4. Now 7/8 you might find a bit trickier to get that size shape. I've got a die that cuts those, so I can cut my own, but certainly 3/4 inch hexagons work really well and are easily available. But what I thought I would do, move this out of the way, and we'll just mock up our little few quilt blocks here again, is in these snowball blocks, to get rid of my other pieces of fabric, I'm going to put some hexagons in there. So I'm going to have some nice bit of machine piecing, which I love to do. I'm going to have some nice bit of English paper piecing, hand sewing, which I also love to do. So I'm really looking forward to cracking on with this one. It's going to take a little bit longer because there's some blocks to make, some English paper piecing to do, and then some hand sewing to do. But I'm going to really enjoy doing that in the evenings, at the weekends, Sunday afternoon sewing. That will absolutely be perfect for me. And like I say, it uses up all of those scraps, so they're not all going to sit in my scrap pile. So I will hopefully, as I'm working on this, what I aim to do, and somebody might need to give me a nudge because I'm really bad. I say to the people here, I'll take some photos and we can put them up on our Facebook and Instagram. And then I get so involved doing it, I forget to do it. But what I would like to do this time is take some pictures of me working on this and some progress so you can all see it out there. So keep an eye on Facebook and Instagram for that. And if you're having a go at this, or if you're working on any scrap quilt, Please do remember to share your inspiration with other people through our Facebook, through our Instagram, but also you can email things directly to us as well. We love to see what you're doing. So I hope you enjoyed seeing that. I hope to fairly soon bring some progress on this and certainly sort of a finish on the centre of the quilt, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do in borders, etc. That's how I tend to work when I'm doing my scrappy quilts. So thank you for spending some time here with us today. If you like what you see, please do help our channel by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all of those things. And if you don't want to miss a tutorial, you can hit that bell and it will notify you when we upload a new video. So thank you for your time, as I said, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.